I'm Claudia Morales with the Music Division, and today I have right next to me the son of Latin music, El Sonero Mayor, American pianist, composer, band leader, social activist, Mr. Eddie Palmieri. Known around the world for his fearless piano techniques, his innovative and unique compositions, and his legendary orchestra La Perfecta, Eddie is a true living legend. With a career that spans for over 7 decades, Eddie has won many accolades, including 10 Grammys and the first Grammy in the category of Best Latin Music Recording in 1975. In 2009, the Library of Congress included his album Azúcar Pa' Ti in the National Recording Registry due to its relevance to the American culture. Eddie, it is my honor to welcome you to the Library of Congress.
Thank you so very much. Thank you.
Before we start here, we just had some moments viewing some collections, and we started with Arsenio Rodriguez, with Machito, with Mario Bauza. What memories those collections bring to you going back in time?
Well, you have to remember that my brother Charlie Palmieri was 9 years older than me, okay? And my mother, who arrived in 1925 on a cargo ship from Puerto Rico, and then my father arrived in another cargo ship. There was no cruceros then, okay? And they bring about 6 or 7 families. He arrived in 26. They got married. My brother was born 27. I'm born 36. And my mother never thought she'd have another child. You know, she went through a bad birth with my brother and that, you know. But it was my mother who put us on the piano. She was the one, you know, with my brother and that. And my brother naturally, we used to bring records over. And I, as a young man, I used to sing. My father used to take us to a recording studio that was in the house. The guy used to make records, you know, and my uncles would sing with guitars, and eventually one of my uncles, I landed up playing timbales for 3 years, you know, which my mother showed me the superiority of women because she didn't want me to play timbales. So when she bought the case to put the timbales in, they weighed more than 3 pairs of timbales. And then she would tell me, Eduardo, tú no ves qué lindo se ve tu hermano cuando va a trabajar, que no tiene cargado un instrumento. Eddie, don't you see, and it was Edward, when she had to tell me something. Edward, did you see how beautiful your brother looks when he goes to work and he doesn't have to carry an instrument? And now my uncle is, hey, come on, Eddie, you know, Chino's one tropical. I'm going to pick up the case, and I said, I'm learning more. And 3 years later, I gave the timbales to my uncle, made him a deal he couldn't refuse, and I went back to the piano. I had started in the piano earlier when she was a concert pianist, and she taught in the Carnegie Hall. Was my teacher, and my brother brought me to her, you know. She did the Negro history books, okay. Then I met another gentleman from Claudio Saavedra from Spain. And he then worked with me with the independence of the fingers. Not the independence, you know, of how to play thirds that sound like bells, sixes, and that really the classical preparation for hand distribution, weight distribution, and it's scale runs and start to realize that all the fingers are different sizes. So how do you get them to, you have to control the fingers and you control them by doing trills and putting all your fingers down and then going 2, 3, and they gotta go to attention. And 1 turn, 2 turns. And that took me years to prepare, which led to Azúcar Pa' Ti, that I accompanied myself with a guajeo on the left hand, and solo really with the right, you know, which had the Benico. And that was something that I was looking for because I was quite unprepared, playing timbales for 3 years. And my reading, everything, I had to go start all over again. As my brother was recommending me to different orchestras.
Because your brother already He
My brother
played at
started
the
with Tito
Palladium.
Puente
Uh-huh.
in the 1950s. So at 15, my brother took me to the Palladium Ballroom, you know, and that's where I saw Tito Puente, met him, the great Manuel Kendo, Mongo, the Machito, Mario Balsar, you know. And but the genius of the Machito orchestra was Rene Hernandez. Oh, my teacher was Miss Margaret Barnes.
Okay.
Okay, and she landed up with the Fantastics at the end of her career. Okay, but Mario Balsar was an amazing musician. And he started with his brother-in-law, Machito, in 1939. There's with Ping Madera, which was Jose Madera, that played with Tito Puente later, and another top arranger. And but the one with Rene Hernandez was the genius, which wrote a composition for me, did the arrangement in my first album called Oigun Tumbao. Then he also, in 1975, does the album that I win the first Grammy with Lalo Rodriguez, okay? The Son of Latin Music. And then I go and see him again when he considered himself, he used to work at the Caribe Hilton in Puerto Rico, show band, you know? But he didn't want to writing anymore, you know? He had written for everybody that you could think of, you know, from the Machito Band to Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, Panchito Risset, La Plata, La Playa Sextet. I mean, every orchestra you could think of, Rene Hernandez worked for, did arrangements for. Oh, and Vicentico Valdez, which I learned with him in 1954, que la voz elástica de las Américas. And I played with him for 2 years. And after that, I went with Tito Rodriguez for 2 years. And then I started my own orchestra late 1961. But those years earlier, my brother was working. That was the greatest time that our music held the highest esteem all over the world because they were doing the mambo all over the world.
Were you there in one of those nights when they had the two Titos playing?
Sure.
How was that?
Oh, that was amazing because the Tito Rodriguez was very envious, you know, of Tito Puente because Tito Puente always got top billing. But Tito Puente had that on his contract, 100% top billing, no other way. But Tito Rodriguez kept hammering, you know, hammering. I recorded with him the album live at the Palladium in 1959. And then we took off in 1958. I drove to Phoenix, Fort Worth with Tito Rodriguez driving. Then we came back, you know, then we drove to Vegas. And then we stood there for a month because Tito made a show, Soul Shoe. It was a lousy show.
Okay.
You know, we got fired right away in a month. He used to put on a 6-gallon hat and 2 guns and sing,
really?
My name is Hapo Tito, bang, bang. And they threw us out of there. The Palladium Ballroom was the greatest dance hall ever. It used to be a 2-story dance studio, 10 cents a dance during the war, Second World War. And then Mr. Hyman was, he was in the Garment Center. His wife was an heir to the Otis elevators. Some money they had, you know, he negotiates and buys the 2-story building right across the street from the Ed Sullivan Theater now, you know. And then next to the Birdland, that was the greatest jazz room ever. Just across the street, you're in the Birdland or in the Palladium.
Right.
It held 1,000 people. And on Wednesdays, you had the mambo show. You had the amateur show, you know, they put numbers on whoever won $25 a piece. And they came to professional dancers, all in tuxedos, like the Mambo Aces, Ogie and Margot, these names, you know. And then the bands like Machito, or Tito Puente, or myself, you know, later on. But we played the mambo night, you know, the show. So, and you had guests like Marlon Brando, Kim Novak, the Hollywood people that were coming in, because remember, it's the mambo now.
Right.
It's worldwide.
Right.
Fred Prado, you know, makes it mambo number 5, and he doesn't create the mambo, but he makes it the fame.
Right.
The one that created the mambo was Cachao and Bajita del Caño.
Right.
It was his brother, when they wrote a number called Mambos, but it was all over the world, you know? And so, but that's the height of heights for us, you know?
There's a story about when your brother was playing at the Palladium and you were thinking about how to get a gig there, how to get hired. What did you do to talk to the owner so that he could hire you?
Oh, you don't want to hear that. I'm going to tell you about friends list. What are friends for? I became a marker. Because I was very popular in La Perfecta, uptown. You couldn't come into New York, into Manhattan, because there was a lot of racism. And you know, with the La Jara, and there was the police, you know, the Irish, you know. And a lot of the jazz players, Suffolk got beaten up, you know. Bud Powell was arrested constantly. Miles Davis was beaten in front of the Birdland, you know. Okay, so there's a catering hall, beautiful. And I negotiated that on Wednesdays, I'm gonna run it. You see, so I'm a barker in the street. Now, on that Palladium the billboard sign, Machito, Charlie Palmieri, my brother. Not there, folks. Because they had to pass by. They had to pass by from the subway. When on 52nd, you have to go towards 53rd. You had to pass the Birdland, that catering hall, and then you go across the street, and that's the Palladium. I'm stopping them from getting there because they heard the band was doing so well in the Bronx. La Perfecta. You know, it was different. It was one of the greatest orchestras that ever was put together. And it was accidental how it happened. Because I met Barry Rogers, the trombonist, doing a jam session with Johnny Pacheco. Where Johnny becomes very famous with doing a partnership with Jerry Masucci when they made Fania. Okay, but I played the first Fania All-Star at the Red Garter in 1964. But on a Tuesday, and in the Bronx, in the Hunts Point Palace area, they used to be the building that had a friend of mine called Angelo, and he ran that, and he had music. And then Pacheco was doing a jam session, and I see this trombone player, long hair and that, you know, and it was Barry Rogers. So I asked him, listen, the reason was that I knew all the trumpet players because I was with Vicentico 2 years in the Palladium, so I knew the great trumpet players, the Tito Rodriguez and all that. But you had to pay them Class A scale, and I'm just starting. And there's no such, you know, I couldn't do that. So with Barry Rogers, we started with one trombone and a gentleman called George Castro that was playing the wooden flute. That was the typical of the flutes of Cuba. And he was with another band, and now I could use one at a time. One night I used the two of them together. I had enough money for that. I said, that's the sound. You know, and all we needed was one more trombone to give it the sound of the roaring elephants, they used to call it. And that's when Barry, in the recording, meets Jose Rodriguez, the other trombonist that was Brazilian. And he just arrived, and Barry meets him in a recording studio. He said, Eddie, I found the trombone player. All right. So meanwhile, I'm barking. And I'm barking. At that time, Jose Cubelo was a very famous pianist with Orquesta de Cuba, the Riverside. Great pianist, Peluchin. And they were in Venezuela in 1939. He leaves Venezuela leaves the band with $100. When Jose Curbelo passed away, he was a multimillionaire.
Wow.
Okay? By the time that I'm the barker, I had already signed with Curbelo because he went to see my brother at that time at a place called the International. And in the International, there was a supper club. There was no clubs to dance except the Palladium. So, and my brother and the band, they worked there for six nights a week, all right? So he comes in there with his accent, Curbelo, you know, and he asks my brother, hey, Charlie, and he had the greatest effect, my brother as the pianist. In my brother's time, nobody could touch my brother on the piano alone, nobody. So I call him the pianist before, during, and after, okay? So Curbelo told him, hey, Charlie, how much are you making here? And Charlie, you know, he was paying maybe about $90 in the musicians, you know, $100 the most, you know, at that time. And my brother was making maybe $350 a week as the leader, all right? So Curbelo tells him, suppose I telling you I could get you that money in one night. And my brother said, what do I sign? So that's when my brother makes the decision to make an orchestra, and that's when he makes the Orquesta du Monet with the strings and Johnny Pacheco playing flute, because Johnny Pacheco was playing with that quartet with him and practicing flute. He was playing bongo in an album called Easy Does It.
What year is that?
That's 1957.
Okay.
When my brother records that Easy Does It, and by 58, this is all going, this is happening, okay? So, and then he makes that du Monet, you know? And the charanga was doing well, except then Pacheco makes his charanga. Because Pacheco did a number called El Guido de Macorina, that overnight, nobody wanted to play because I had the double sentido. Dile Macorina que me toque el Guido, ay, que me toque, but with the dance of the pachanga. And the thing, there was one disc jockey called Ralph Font in Jersey. He told Johnny, and he knew Johnny, I'll play the record for you. Overnight, Johnny sells 100,000 45s, which was completely unheard of. None of the top men, nobody is selling something like that. So he then eventually makes his own charanga. And he brings in Manny Oquendo, that was with Vicentico, and who plays with me later, you know. And his charanga was rocking, you know.
And are you playing at the Palladium at that time or not yet?
No, I come in to Palladium in 1963.
In 63.
And because I couldn't, I'm barking at 63 because when the old man comes to see Curbelo, he says, it's Charlie Palmieri's brother. He's outside and he's taking, because what happened is they lost their liquor license. They treated the Puerto Ricans very, very badly, throwing them downstairs, these big bouncers. And Wednesday night was, you know, celebrity night. Friday was all the ladies that would take the whole section of seats and tables, and they bought the Palladium a lot of money. Then Saturday was the blue collar workers, which is mostly Puerto Ricans and, you know, Dominicans, whatever. And Sunday was all Afro-American. 1,000, you know, people dancing every night at the Palladium Ballroom. Unbelievable, man. So now he's complaining about me. So Curbelo told him, then you will have to book him. And he gave me 90 dates, and that's what I was after.
And that's when you got in.
You know, but look what I was getting paid, $179.50 for the whole band. And because they had an $18 scale, the Palladium, which meant that you worked the 4 days, you get $72, they took out taxes. And Curbelo took his 10%, $17.45. I'm telling you, he was you know, he was something else. So now you will get the mostly, I was very popular with the blacks, you know, and they were coming. We have to have Eddie Palmieri on this thing. It's impossible. He in the Palladium. That was, yeah, he was amazing. No, Mr. Curbelo, impossible. He in the Palladium. Because once you mention the Palladium, you know, I tell you what, come tomorrow. I see what I can do. And as soon as the kids went, they picked up the phone. Max, to Maxwell Hammond, I want to pull Eddie Palmieri out on this stage. I'll get you a band to tour. But okay, whatever you say, we'll say, okay, bye. Now the kids come the next day, you know. Was you able to get him? Now you sound like Bela Lugosi. You have no idea how long you are. How much? It's 600. So I went from $179.50 to 600, and Cubello went from $17.45 to $60.
Wow.
And that's why now I come in and now I stay. I closed the Palladium in 1966.
Oh, you closed?
I stayed 3 years with
until they
Orchestra
closed.
Broadway.
Right. Then fast forward, well, 1 year before, 1965, you recorded Suka Pati.
65.
65. And that was the album that made you Eddie Palmieri.
Yeah.
That was your staple.
Everybody loved that.
Everybody loved it.
Especially again, the blacks.
You had the trombone
Everybody
there.
had the albums under
album.
yeah.
You had the trombone front and center.
Right.
And after the album, the trombone became the staple of Afro-Caribbean music around the world.
Yeah, all the pawn shops got rid of all the trombones that were in the pawn shop. Everybody started looking for trombones and they were buying them at a good price at the pawn shop.
What made you put the trombone there and give it such a centerpiece in
It
your
was an
music?
economical situation. I couldn't afford the trumpet players. I couldn't pay the class A. And now I got a genius of a trombone, which was Barry. He was a great trombone player and a great arranger, orchestrator. He never really wrote the business for anybody, but an orchestrator. And I dove into that knowledge, and between the both of us, we became the perfecta. And it stood from late 61 to 68 when it broke up.
Years later, we were looking at Harlem River Drive, 1971.
I came from a gentleman called Calvin Clash, known as Snooky, and he had lyrics. He wrote all the lyrics that were on that album, except Idle Hands. But he wrote, and he died in Sing Sing, the prison. He was always locked up for grand larceny, So we get together with him. I meet Ronnie Cuba, and now with Ronnie Cuba, and we took a studio in the Manhattan, and we start arranging the compositions one by one, And Ronnie then, put them together. And I told him exactly what I'm looking for and what we want, because I was looking for the crossover. But what happens? Here we go again. I had already brought the CIA and the FBI to Mr. Morris Levy when I did Mambo con Coca es Mozambique. Mozambique at that time was coming from Pedro el African in Cuba. But the regime already was a communist country now, after 59, okay? So now the CIA come, because Alpha 66, when they arrived, that's the Cubans, the first, the rich Cubans, doctors and that, they came in. They accused me of being a communist. So it gets to the FBI, because they threatened the recording stations. If you play Eddie Palmieri, we're gonna blow up your station. So I explained it to him, It's like the Koga. Mr. V, I see. And you could edit it up, and I gotta say how he said it. I see. Mr. Palmieri, don't record that anymore for me, you understand? So I said, you got a deal. Okay. Now, when I do Harlem River Drive, and I'm looking for the crossover, I said, because I asked Mr. Mark, I said, I'd like to record on Roulette, not Tico, the subsidiary. Roulette like Tommy James, and the Shondells, He was signed to him. So he gives me the permission. And now I'm thinking, here I go, I'm on my way, My biggest fans were the Weathermen. The Weathermen was the anti-government movement, that when they gave them a raid, the FBI finds my album in all their cars, especially the leader of the Weathermen. back to Morris leaving the CIA and the FBI. Again, Mr. Palmieri, what did you record for me this time? I said, what do you mean, what did they record? You give me permission to do Harlem River Drive. How did I know where it was going to land? I see. Mr. Palmieri, I don't need the CIA or the FBI to come to see me for something that I didn't do. Is that clear, Mr. Palmieri? And clear the bell, boss. The next album, Mozambique. I knew it was just because of Mozambique, but after that, I never allowed to be told how and what to record. I'm the one that recorded the least, but I put my albums against any. That's my pride. Because that's going to be there, and that was my pride for the students that are coming behind me to learn how to play the instruments that are on these albums, because the musicians that are on it were the best at that time.
Back to Azúcar Pa' Ti. In 2009, it was included in the, as we said before, in the National Recording Registry. What did it mean to you at that time in your life to have one album included in this registry?
I fainted. I thought that was the greatest. And my wife was still alive then. She died in 2014. And it was just unbelievable. It was just a wonderful thing to happen at the time that I was going through rough times. Okay? And rough times meant fighting with with the promoters, fighting with the record companies, because they had everybody controlled, and I couldn't be controlled by anyone. I mean, it was like I wouldn't want to be with the bunch. If I would have wanted to be with the bunch, I would have called myself Eddie Banana with music with appeal. That wasn't going to work. So I never joined Fania till 1980. And when they were on their way down, and that's when I recorded one of their greatest album that they ever released, which is the White Album, because I had the great trumpet player, Victor Paz, that we hadn't seen each other for 3 years. And he did 25 years on Broadway, lead trumpet. I mean, real, without making mistakes, for 2 or 3 years. He was the greatest first trumpet player ever. Now I have El Día Que Me Quiera, de Carlos Gardel. And if nobody could do it, Rene Hernandez does the arrangement with strings, oboe, cello. I wanted to use how you could use classical instruments. It's called the White Album, okay?
I know it.
And then Rene Hernandez told me, Eddie, ya yo veo lo que tú quieres, because I was taught the design of the whole. Before I do the arrangement, I see it, the whole arrangement. And then I said, the problem is I gotta now write it out, I wish I could press my belly button and the parts come out, but that's not gonna happen. So sure enough, I had to call Victor Paz. So I called his registry. Mr. Paz, I hadn't seen him in 3 years. We had a separation, okay? Because when I did the CBS deal, was $500,000. He thought he was entitled to this deal, and he wasn't. But anyway, now he showed up at the studio. He's Panamanian, and I went, BT, and he goes, me llamaste por la conciencia. You called me because of your conscience. And now we started to work. And we came up with that album. And at that time, Fania, the artist, they were so proud that within 100 hours, they were able to give you an album mixed and mastered. Victor Paz and I argued for 100 hours before we even got started. By the time we got to about 300 hours, because at that time, you couldn't bring anybody else because the board was fixed at that time. So there was a Cuban gentleman that worked for Fania coming to complain to Jerry Masucci, Eddie Bernier, you're still in the studio. Nobody could come in and out. And he said, leave him alone. He's like the Beatles. Now the album comes out, 400 hours. And then, as a matter of fact, the engineer, it was Peruvian. Yeah, he became Brother Lee. He became a Mormon after that recording. But they didn't want to pay him his 400 hours, but they paid him, and then he becomes a Mormon. I saw him in Salt Lake City. We had a concert. He was there. Then he passed away. You know, but he gave me a great album mix in that album. And but again, because of Victor Pasadena did all the trumpets, the 4 trumpets, and nobody's ever had him to do a whole. And that's what I was after. You know, when you listen to that album, it's the greatest album of time, and that it's Cheo Feliciano on side A, and Ismael Quintana on side B.
Mr. Palmieri, so we have you here because you are performing at the Coolidge Auditorium tonight. I think I can talk to you the entire day, but I think we're going to go to do sound check.
I ran out of information.
It was great to have you here.
Thank you.
And for the ones watching,
It's my honor to be here.
and for the ones watching from home, I'll see you soon.